Hello everyone, my name is Pavel Ryzhov. I'm a fairly recent PhD in biomedical sciences, and today I'd like to talk about talking with your boss, which is basically I'm going to continue making some videos that hopefully will help PhD students or people who would like to do a PhD. And the topic of this video is about talking with your supervisor or principal investigator. And before I go into the details of some of the things that I think are very important to keep in mind when you are about to start this very important relationship in your PhD, I want to say thank you very much to everybody who had given me feedback about my previous video on 7 things you should do when you start your PhD. I really got really great feedback, so I wanted to say thank you very much for all of your messages. And without further ado, let's get into this video, which is again talking to your boss or supervisor. And again, I always have my notes with me, so apologies for not looking directly at the camera all the time. So the first point I wanted to make is you got to learn who that person is in terms of who is your supervisor from other people. The reason I think it's important is, well, besides the obvious, you want to know who you work with, but it's important to have a second opinion or third opinion, or basically as much opinion as you can from other people about how was their working relationship. And granted, everybody is different and everybody may have a very different relationship with the supervisor, but the more people you will have a chance to speak with on that subject will inform you better about what kind of relationship you might have with that person. And it goes without saying how important that relationship really is, because it would define the struggles, it would define the successes over many years of your PhD journey. So it is absolutely essential to know what kind of leadership style or management style your supervisor has in order to better understand how you should react or how you should act in terms of projects that you're working on, the attitude that you are presenting, and just overall how are you going to behave in front of the supervisor. So the second important thing I think is crucial to make sure you guys understand is when you are talking with the supervisor, when discussing your different projects, you always have to have an action plan. And naturally, I would say this: any plan that you can come up with in terms of what you want to do in the PhD is very difficult to truly realize and stick to the deadlines, practically because of the fact that typically things don't work. So you gotta always not just have an action plan, you always have to have a backup plan, ideally more than one, because you need to have a security when it comes to discussing your project with your supervisor, because they might say, well, this is not very realistic, or this is too ambitious, or actually, no, that's exactly what I'm looking for, but what else can you do? So you always have to have backup plans, backup projects that you would like to discuss in more detail with your supervisor, so they would always know that you're actually prepared to do more than you're supposed to for the main project, or that you can always pivot to a different project if the first one doesn't go the way that is expected. And on top of just having a project, an action plan, or a backup plan, or multiple backup plans, you always have to have ideas. Ideas are not necessarily plans, but some of the things that you pick up on as you read the literature, as you discuss your progress with your colleagues. You always have to have some new interesting ideas that you can bounce around, just in case all the projects or the backup projects are actually not going the way you want to, because it's basically the main thing that I guess I've learned is a redundancy. You gotta have some ideas, some crazy ideas even, that you can always pursue, or at least mention in the passing, like, oh, I just read up this interesting thing, and I have an idea for this particular experiment. And it tends to be that the ideas don't actually go all the way to fruition. They're important to stimulate some of the other projects that you're currently already going and pursuing. So when you have a discussion with your boss, you always can say, oh, by the way, I have this idea, maybe this will play into the project down the line. And depending on what kind of idea it is, your supervisor, your PI, would actually may appreciate that idea, or they might have a different take on that that actually can really help you to shape the project in a way that will, give you the results, or expedite the research process. So always have an action plan, a few backup plans, and a few ideas when you discuss things with your boss. The third is something that I think everybody needs to get better at, is being prepared to defend your arguments. And this is super critical, because what it really means is, when you are discussing your results with your supervisor, you tend to obviously, how do you say it? You tend to make sure that they understand where you're coming from and what those results mean, based on your understanding of the project, based on your understanding of the goals for the project. So defending your scientific arguments, especially in the beginning, is actually very, very hard, because you may not have read as much literature, you may not know the theory or background as well as they do. So preparing for a discussion, for argumentative scientific discussion, is a great skill to pick up on as early as possible, because the more fruitful discussions you can have with your boss, the further your project will actually go, and the earlier you would be able to pivot should your results actually match or not match with expectations, with the hypothesis, and so on and so forth. So instead of being just guided by the interpretation of the results from your supervisor, knowing how to defend the scientific results that you obtain and provide reasonable scientific arguments is a great skill to muster as early as possible. Number 4 is communication, and specifically proactive communication. You want to make sure you keep talking to your supervisor. The worst thing you can do in your PhD is work by yourself, just having some action plan without real feedback, and then a few months later or a few years later you realize, oh, this is not the direction that you were supposed to go, or you spent way too much time on this particular project without having any backup and without having any reasonable results. Spoiler alert, I was in somewhat of that kind of situation where I was not really as proactive in my discussions with my boss early on, and that really hurt me in the beginning. So eventually, what I learned is I learned to communicate well. I learned to not really stay away from reasonable proactive discussions. I learned how to defend my scientific results and provide scientifically reasonable arguments. This was very important to elevate the relationship, the professional relationship between me and my supervisor. And it also propelled my research forward a lot faster than it was before, being super engaged in these proactive discussions. So this is a critical piece of advice that, especially early on, you can capitalize on and really take the time to learn what's the style of your supervisor, in terms of how much feedback they can give you, what kind of projects that they are interested in you pursuing, and so on. So proactive conversation is really critical. And the last point I wanted to make is, when you are proactive in your conversations, you want to make sure that you set the expectations for your projects as early as possible. And what I really mean by that is, you have a project, you have some kind of hypothesis, and you're trying to get to certain results. And without a clear action plan, without some kind of deadlines, without some kind of intermediate results and milestones, it's very difficult to gauge your performance, because, again, PhD is a very long journey. It's a multi-year commitment, and you need some kind of milestones to gauge your achievement level. And you need that not only just, from the bureaucracy standpoint, you need that for your own personal understanding of where you are on this journey, how far you've come, and how far you need to go. So, setting expectations, having proactive discussions with your supervisor, and being able to come up with a plan where you could say, okay, I need to get some results by this date, and based on those results, we can pivot to um, a different project or adjust our goals accordingly, is very important, because this will expedite your process and expedite your projects by so much. This is something I was not particularly good at in the beginning, but I definitely learned over the years to make sure that the expectations for some of those projects were actually set in advance. But it's not just about setting expectations; it's also about adjusting them accordingly, because the PhD is all about being flexible, and because you deal with so much failures and uncertainties, you need to have, again, those backup plans. You need to have those ideas that can inform how you're going to adjust your strategy in terms of expectations for your results for your projects. So you need to be proactive in those conversations, and then make sure that as soon as you see that the project may be not going the way that it's supposed to, you can adjust those milestones in terms of how much longer they might take, or completely change the project in a different direction, so as to not waste time potentially. And to do that, you have to be very proactive in your conversations. I think these are very important points, not just in PhD work, but they are very important in the industry at large, in any kind of relationship that you have with your supervisors. So I hope you find these a few bits of advice helpful. Please let me know in the comments or by messaging me on LinkedIn what you think about this video. I look forward to reading your messages and comments. Thank you very much for watching. Please let other people know about these videos that I'm making, as well as my YouTube channel overall. I look forward to bringing you more tidbits about my experience in PhD, as well as some advice that I can hopefully share with you and that you will find useful. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye bye.